Yeah, so again, another good question. You asked me, what is my purpose? What is my reason for getting up in the morning and the work that I do? Um, and I'll admit that I'm a bit of a follower of Simon Sinek and Roger Martin, and I look at the books they've written and the talks that they give, and they kind of provide guidance to some of the work that I do now. And again, I now work with a team who are focused on the spatial industry, um, and really our goal is to really inject innovation into business processes, to help spatial organizations really take advantage of what is an environment that's changing very rapidly. Data and technology is changing quickly. How do they take advantage of what's coming to provide to create new value essentially for their customers and for their business? So that's kind of the thrust of my life. Actually, I think about this in work and outside of work, and it's kind of that creative process I've spoken about in other conversations. So I- I'll share with you some of my experiences historically and what I've learned in organizations I work for and with. Um, I think it's interesting to look at the world of business and how, and again, I've mentioned this in other talks, the world of programming, which I used to work in, is very sort of tight. It's very algorithmy. It's very frameworky. There's lots of structure to it, whereas business is less structured. I'm not being unfair to business, but it generally is unstructured, and there isn't sort of a one formula path to get somewhere. That's why so many startups fail. Um, and there's also a inclination in the technology world for businesses to be run by technologists who aren't commercially focused. And again, we work with organizations that have that leaning. They either lean on their engineers for commercial thoughts, new products, etc., or they have a leadership team who are very commercially centric. Very technology centric and less savvy commercially. Um, so let me just step away and talk about some of the things that I've kind of watched and learned as I've gone through my career. Um, and I'm always looking at these kind of two types of people. I think there's the folks that are big picture thinkers, and let's call that strategy. I think, and I'm going to touch on strategy in a minute. But strategic thinkers are generally big picture thinkers. They're generally senior folks. They should be senior folks in organizations. So I've read about the other day that 50% of the time of a CEO should be sort of looking ahead and doing that strategic thinking, having that vision, understanding where the market's going and where the company should be directed. 25% is getting the work done that needs to be done sort of immediately. And then 25% is kind of putting out fires. So there has to be sort of the heads down piece to someone that's in a leadership role, and also that heads up piece. That's how it's described in that book. And I've found in my career a lot of times people are what I think you're wired in certain ways. I think some people are very detail oriented, and other people are much more, again, big picture oriented. Big picture being those big. I always think of it as those big jigsaw puzzle pieces, and then you kind of drill down from the big picture into the details. I think a lot of organizations start in the details because the folks that are in the organizations are detail thinkers. It's rare to find really good big picture thinkers, and even rarer to find people that can combine big picture thinking and drill down into the details. So again, I think there's an interesting place where people's wiring is important. And again, we're in Spatial Advisors, we're a mix of big picture thinkers and detail thinkers. So we've got a nice combination. And I think that's the perfect mix of people in any organization, actually, to have that. I think there's more often than not, you'll find more detail thinkers and very far fewer of the big picture thinkers, as I've mentioned. So where am I going with that thinking? I'm actually driving down into this place of strategy and tactics. And I'll use this as a good example of what that means. And Roger Martin talks a lot about what true strategy is, not planning, true strategy. And some of what I'm going to tell you is what guides my work at Spatial Advisors, how I work with customers. I think that strategy is around that notion. And let's put it into context of what I'm just talking about here. If you're going to hire someone in a leadership position, you have to be hiring someone that is a big picture thinker. You've got to understand so strategically, you need to have a strategy where you're looking specifically for that type of person. And too often than not, people can pretend to be that and are actually a detail thinkers that are in a strategic role. I've seen that so often in my career. Tactics are the application of strategy. So if you're hiring someone to be an innovator, for example, innovation is a combination of big picture thinking, vision, that wider thought process, and then sort of drilling down from there. But if you've got someone that's in that leadership position driving innovation, they have to have that ability to think in a big way. So there's your strategy. We need to find someone that has that ability and nurture that person and grow them in their job. That's a longer term picture. The details of that is the actual details of those strategies, of those innovation sessions. Now, that person leads it, brings other people in. That's more the tactical part of that, where you actually apply the strategy piece, i.e. we've just hired exactly the right person who can lead this innovation effort. And then that person tactically applies their experience, brings the right people in the room, knows how to collaborate, I spoke about earlier in the week, to bring out the best of people and drive things forward. So it's kind of I would say, I'm not overstating this, but I would say sort of proactive is strategy, big picture is strategy, reactive is more the tactical piece of that. And you can use sports analogies for that until the cows come home. So I think that quite often we find organizations are looking to grow, but they're very, very centric on tactical hires. We need a salesperson, we need a marketing person, classic places there. Now, I think that sales and marketing are primarily tactical roles. They're channels, they're relationships, they're all of those good things, they're content, but it's very tactical. But it's guided by strategy. If you don't have a clear strategy, then your tactics will be a fail. Two good examples that come to my mind. I worked with a couple of organizations over the last 10 years. They both had products which had been built for different markets. And they wanted to take those products and sell them in a different way, in a different market with a different approach. Now, they hired salespeople to do that work, but neither of them had a strategy as how they were going to do that. Did the product fit that new market? Did it provide value to customers in that new market? All of those questions, those are strategic questions, very much strategic. Now, again, we won't get into the details of what's go to market, but Roger Martin's argument is if you build a strategy, then the pieces that make up finally what are the tactics are kind of baked into that strategy. So at the end of the day, the guiding framework, if you like, of the tactics of the strategy. So strategy starts the journey, tactics are the pieces that come off of it. And sales and marketing folks are execution folks. They're people on the ground that are applying the tactics against that strategy. And it's so often missed, that important piece. So often missed. And usually when I work with folks, I step back and say, let's understand from a bigger picture perspective the strategy before we get into the tactics. So often the need is, we need content, or we need to better do social marketing, or we need to sell more stuff. But you need to start in the strategic place. And I think that there's certain things, and again, I'm guided by Sinek and Roger Martin, but there are certain elements that make up that sort of strategic piece. I think you have to understand your purpose. Simon Sinek says start with why. What's your vision? What's your winning aspiration? Define that. That has to be really clearly defined up front. It's a tactical piece. If you think about your solution, Sinek talks about the how and the what of a solution. He talks about Apple. Apple, their purpose is to think differently, challenge status quo. Their how is they make these amazing computers, elegantly designed, easy to use. And their what is they build computers. So understanding starts with your purpose. Then you think about your solution. You might have multiple solutions, so you could be going down different paths to this place. But I think the second piece is understanding that how and what of the solution. The next piece, jumping into Roger Martin's world, is where are you playing? Now, that's very much about the verticals, the customers, the personas, how you're going to reach those people, the channels. So the where you're playing piece is an important piece of definition. Some people would make that a go-to-market conversation. I believe in the same as Roger Martin. It formed part of your core strategy. Where are you playing? The next piece to that is how are you going to win? Now, those are, again, elements which need careful thought and research, but they're things like value proposition, competitive advantage, business model, competition, differentiators. All that good stuff has to be defined very clearly up front. So once you've got those sort of strategic pieces built, and again, I think a lot of companies have strategies, but some of these pieces are not necessarily in place quite clearly within that. So often we'll take the existing strategy and just fill in those gaps, put it into that sort of framework that I'm talking about here. Then the next piece of that, which is the key piece, is how do you make winning a reality? And that's really the tactical pieces. And I'll call it smarketing. You know, it's working with product teams, sales teams, marketing teams. There's elements of innovation in there, tactical innovation, but you really need to be thinking around those two aspects. They're not separate. You need that guiding strategy. You need to have all those questions answered. Strategy hypothesis, again, according to Roger Martin. So you're trying to prove or disprove that hypothesis. The tactical piece is how you're applying that, how that strategy guides you into the pieces that come into play within that sort of business focused, customer understanding world. I haven't spoken about design thinking in this, but there is an element of design thinking in there, human centric, starting with the customers, all that good stuff. That really kind of falls into, some of that feeds back into the strategy, obviously, because you do need to understand your customers. And that's kind of why that loop, that communication, and again, we often work with between product sales and marketing teams to make sure that there's that glue between those groups, because you only really get that feedback from customers through guys that are in the field, often the sales team, feeding back into the product teams, feeding back to the marketing teams. What stories are we telling? How do we evolve the product? What new products can we build? So, you know, there is a framework. Just to close out, there is a framework of operation, I think, when one thinks about success in this evolving spatial world. And what we do at Spatial Advisors is trying to frame that, trying to build a little bit of, dare I say, science, at least structure into that journey to success in business. And there's no guarantee for success in any of this, but if you're looking at it in a very iterative way, in a learning way, in an adjusting way, that's the strategy, that's the tactics. So you need a sort of a framework of operation to win. And I think that's why I'm very drawn to Simon Sinek and the other guys that talk strategy in a more clear way and not planning, like Roger Martin. So those are my high level thoughts. That's actually, I've defined really my purpose, what I jump out of bed in the morning to do, even why I do these talks, because actually as I do these talks, it helps me frame some of that stuff in my own mind and connect dots. So I hope that was helpful to people, and I hope that answers your question.